Today we're relaxing by the lake with Jen, a QHS member whose life journey is as refreshing and inspiring as a day spent by the water. But what currents guided her to where she is today? Let's take a peaceful stroll through her story and see what's been happening behind the scenes.
So I'm Jen, and I was born in 1970. I am in western part of Massachusetts. I was born to a family. I should say I am a twin. I have a fraternal brother who arrived 7 minutes after me. In the family, there is also another set of twins that came 11 months before us. Yes, they heard 2 heartbeats with that set of twins, so they knew there was 2 coming. But yet when my mom went into labor with me, they had only heard 1 heartbeat all along. And my twin and I were, I think it was 8 weeks early, so we were premature, and she went into labor. And the doctor, once she delivered me, the doctor said, "You're not done yet. Keep pushing. There's another one in there." They're like, "What?" So they weren't very happy about the fact that there was 2 more babies coming along 11 months from the previous set of twins. And they had, prior to the first set of twins, they had my oldest brother. So he was 4 when they were born and 5 when my twin and I were born. So needless to say, the family was not ready for another 2 babies to come in, never mind just one that there was me that they were aware of. So we had 4 twin cribs lined up in the living room. When we outgrew the cribs, there was 4 twin beds that lined the living room, and that was our bedroom up until I think I was around the age of maybe 8 years old when we were graduated to the upstairs of the house. It was a Cape style home, and they finally managed to put the funds together to renovate the upstairs of the house and created 2 bedrooms. So my sister and myself had 1 bedroom, and my twin and the other brother had the 2nd bedroom. That was kind of difficult because my twin and I were so close that we would sleep in the same bed. We would crawl over the other beds to get into bed with each other. And losing that ability, because now we were separated by rooms, was kind of difficult. So one or the other of us would sneak into the other person's bedroom, climb into bed, pull the covers over our head. And the reason for pulling the covers over our head was because my father at the time did not see that as a healthy thing for us to do. And so he would check our bedrooms and pull one or the other out of the bed and put us into the appropriate bed, which we did not like. So I almost wished that we had that 4 beds still in the living room at that time. Our bond was definitely strong. It continues to be strong. It's just in a different way now as adults. And my parents did their best to raise us in the ways and the manners that they knew how. It was a very chaotic upbringing. I won't go into details about that, but it was not a peaceful upbringing. Nothing that was on their own. Nothing malignant. That was all benign in terms of them just doing the best they could to get through life. Each of them had come from some pretty significant traumas of their own and never dealt with them. And that was normal for that generation. They didn't talk about those things. It just, everything, you just kept going. So it didn't take me until my 20s to realize the chaos and how it had impacted me. And the way that I became the family social worker, and I became even a deeper empath than I know I was born as. But I think that my life situation growing up in the family really, really deepened that empath aspect of me. And then I had gone on to become a social worker, got my undergraduate degree in social work, thought I could thought I could help the world. Reality kind of set in within the first few years of doing social work, where I thought, I'm up against a system that's broken. I'm up against a world where the things I want to do, I can't do. I'm I'm only a mere human. So I kind of burnt out quickly with the social work career, and decided I started pursuing other ideas, and ultimately ended up going back to school to get my master's degree in occupational therapy. And from there, I continued working in a helping profession. And also, I hadn't mentioned, but my social work degree primarily was used to help the older adult community. And so, as an occupational therapist, I continued working in that field with older adults, and working in hospital settings, nursing home settings, assisted livings, and then ultimately home health, which I loved. I thrived. I thrived doing all of that. However, I would say it was about, oh gosh, I would say it was about 13 years ago. A culmination of health issues were brewing, and I didn't know what was wrong, going from doctor to doctor. Symptom the symptoms were ranging from every organ and every system of your body, where I started to think, oh my gosh, I must be crazy. Like, because they would come and go, and they were transient at times, and at other times they would persist for extended periods. They were neurological, cardiac, muscular, you name it. It was gastrointestinal. They ranged in all aspects of my body. So I would say the last 3 years of me working full time, I had to take 2 leaves of absences because of my medical condition deteriorating so much. And I was blaming it all on stress, because I was putting too much stress on myself to do what I needed to do, both for my job and for the fact that I, of course, at that point was married, and my husband is a police officer in the city where we live. And he was working opposite shifts of me, and we had one daughter. So she was, very young at the time that things were starting to go haywire health-wise. And so the stress of coming home from work after doing like a 10-hour workday, and having my husband be at work, and just me and my daughter, me trying to do what I needed to do to be there for her, had nothing left. The gas tank was empty, and the symptoms of all my physical issues were raging most every day. So ultimately, I was still using mainstream medicine, and I was still being passed from specialist to specialist, and getting no real concrete answers as to what was going on health-wise. Ultimately, what ended up happening was I was really getting bad. I was in my second leave of absence for medical, and I had experienced some pretty unrelenting pains that were coming and going, but were more present than away. And it was limiting my comfort, my ability to sleep, and my ability to move around. So one morning I woke up, and my entire left side of my body was numb. I couldn't feel my face all the way down to my toes. And I went to the emergency room, and of course, the first thought was stroke. And I was also having a very difficult time articulating my words and getting the words out, both from the brain and from the speech point. They had thought, okay, your MRI does not show that there has been a stroke. You need to schedule with a specialist for a neurologist. And at that point, I had already had something on the books, so that I was going to go to Boston for. I can't recall. It might have been like a 3-month lapse between that date and the day of the appointment. So I went home, and I just continued to deteriorate. I lived in my recliner. I was able to get from the recliner to the bathroom and do very basic tasks with some support. And then it led to the point where I was having a hard time holding my head upright without support. I was terrified. I really thought, oh, is this a brain tumor? Because they're not, but it didn't get caught on the MRI. So I really didn't know what to think. Long story short, about 3 months right before the neurology appointment, a random stranger had spoken to my parents and had said, your daughter sounds just like our daughter. And our daughter went over a decade of being very sick with all sorts of symptoms. And ultimately, she was diagnosed with neurological Lyme disease with several co-infections. So they told me this, and my initial reaction was, I don't have Lyme disease. And I said, no, my test was negative. And then all of the research that I had done, which at that point I was still very much so bought by the mainstream medicine and the mainstream research, I said, no, the Infectious Disease Society says blah, blah, blah. And the testing says this. So no, that's not what I have. And I don't know, I think it was really, truly divine intervention, because I was at a place of such frustration, and I didn't want to talk to anybody about it. I didn't want to talk to anybody I didn't know about it. I was really depressed. Something made me call the woman that they had told me about through my parents. And I spoke to her on the phone for about 2 hours. And within like 10 minutes, I knew what she was saying about Lyme disease and all of the lies that were surrounding it, the crimes surrounding it, and all of the misinformation. I knew that I was one of these people who was blinded by what mainstream was telling me. And that was a reality that really blew things up for me in a bad way, but also in a good way, because now I knew who to reach out for, or reach out to as far as specialists. The backside of that was that none of these specialists are part of the mainstream medicine. So insurance doesn't cover your visits with them. It doesn't cover any of the what they call experimental treatments, because there is no known treatment for chronic neurological Lyme. They basically call it post-Lyme syndrome and make it sound very trivial. Meanwhile, the more I learned about it, the more I realized there were people dying all over the world with this diagnosis. And since then, I've met literally people all over the world. We did a fundraiser to get me treatment at a hospital in Germany that treats only Lyme disease patients and cancer patients. And I went there 10 years ago and met beautiful people with all of the same struggles as me. And some of them did really well with the treatment that the hospital offered, and some of them, like myself, did partially well, but then regressed. From that point, I then went to different doctors, what they call Lyme literate specialists. I went to places, I'm in Massachusetts, I went to places that were in Connecticut, New Hampshire, Maine, upstate New York. And then ultimately I ended up going to Mexico, where we would travel to California and go right over the line into Mexico, where there's a doctor who is an American resident, but does all of his treatments over the line in Mexico, because the United States does not cover, or not that they don't cover, because they don't cover any of the treatment regardless, but they do not allow doctors in the United States to do stem cell treatments the way that he does them. You can go to Germany, you can go to Panama City, you can go, there's so many, Germany, a lot of different places in Europe, Panama, Mexico, but you have to know a reliable source and a reliable clinic, because of course there are clinics out there that are not safe, and you do need to do due diligence research wise to make sure that where you're going is safe. Anyhow, we at that point had no longer had any kind of fundraising money, but we started to pull more money from our lifetime savings that we'd planned for retirement to go to Mexico. And I did that for every 4 months. We would fly from Massachusetts to California, and then just a 30-minute drive from the airport to the clinic in Mexico. And we would stay there for a week, and I would receive a variety of different alternative medicines that did include stem cell infusions. I started to see wonderful results. I was now able to, I want to say by my third trip, so it was 9 months in, I was able to do about 60% of my functional capacity, where I was at 0% prior. And now this was about 6 years into the journey. of this whole nightmare of health decline and inability to work or function. I, like I said, I started to improve about 9 months in, but nothing lasted. It didn't continue. They had said if I could get there more frequently and do the stem cells even on a monthly basis. If I had lived closer to California, I could have done that. But the travel from Massachusetts just to get on a plane from Massachusetts to California did me in. It was really and truly what I call pure hell. And then, of course, the flight and return home, the treatments would hit kind of hard. Not the stem cells, but the other treatments that they were doing would hit hard. I would rebound, but I was just losing like the drive to keep going. Meanwhile, and there were other things going on with my health. Some of that was during the time that I was traveling to Mexico, and other things that had transpired prior to going. I had sustained 4 small strokes within 1 month. Now, these were all the incidents that I'm going to describe were over the period of the last 10 years. But it was 4 small strokes initially. And then I want to say 4 months after that, I developed a pulmonary embolism. I basically ignored the symptoms of the pulmonary embolism because I thought I was having, I also have a diagnosis of dysautonomia, and that's damage to the autonomic nervous system. And that was caused by the Lyme disease going undiagnosed in my body for, we're not sure how long, but it was at least a decade or more that it was in my body undiagnosed, along with the co-infections. So I was ignoring the pulmonary embolism symptoms, and I was also dreading the idea of going to the emergency room, because all of my trips to the emergency room during all of this last 10 plus years, I was very much so met with resistance. Things didn't make sense to the doctors. My immune system was suppressed. It wasn't working right. So if I wasn't developing antibodies or my lab results were looking the way they should, they would immediately say, we don't know what. And, maybe at this point you need to see a psychiatrist. And nothing infuriated me more, because with all, if they had known the person that I was and my background and my ability to just persevere, you would know that, no, I'm not lingering here or malingering, and I don't need a psychiatrist. I need one to deal with you people and your inability to help me. So I'm at home. Meanwhile, the symptoms of the pulmonary embolism are getting worse, and I'm blaming it on the dysautonomia. And then again, this divine intervention, I saw myself picking up the phone and calling 911. Now, as I was doing that, I was saying to myself, what are you doing? What are you doing? Like, no, hang up the phone. And I continued to talk to the, on the other end, and they sent the ambulance. And the whole time I was like, what did you just do? Inside my head, I'm like, afterward I look back, I'm like, that was God. He was directing me. And the EMTs arrived, and some of the pain was starting to dissipate in my chest. And I was like, no, it's okay. It's my dysautonomia. I have this diagnosis. I'm fine. They're like, no, we really need to bring you in just to clear, that you're okay. And I said, I really hate the emergency department. Do we have to go? And I lost that fight. So they brought me, and it was a very busy night at the emergency department. And I lay on a stretcher for easily 6 hours. My husband left work and showed up to be with me. And the pain just increased to the point where I was writhing and just miserable. And they had me on the stretcher out in the hallway, and I'm trying to advocate for myself. And at some point they finally did do, I think it was a CT scan. It's all a big blur, but they did the CT scan, and immediately it was like, oh, you have multiple pulmonary emboli, and that's what's causing your pain. And I knew, that's deadly. Like, okay, so what are we going to do? Can you give me something for pain? And can you fix this? And they dawdled. I couldn't believe, I have a diagnosis of multiple pulmonary emboli, and they're dawdling because they're all running around like chickens and we're busy. And I'm like, so I finally have a diagnosis that you people understand. And here I am writhing and screaming in pain. Can you at least get some blood thinner in me so that I don't end up, dying here on the stretcher? And I had to just keep advocating and advocating and advocating while I was in so much pain. And ultimately, about 2 hours later, they started the Lovenox injections for the blood thinners, and nothing for pain. I think it was hours later before finally some nurse came up and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I can't believe nobody's given you anything for pain." And so anyways, I got the pain medicine, and it eased the pain but didn't fully take it away. And I couldn't wait to get the heck out of there and get home because it was just a really bad hospital experience, one of many. So there's that. I went on blood thinners for a year and a half. And then when they took me off of those, I was nervous. I said, I don't know if I want to come off of these because, I've got so much going on with everything else in my body, but I came off of them. Meanwhile, I'm trying to remember. So I had the pulmonary embolism, the 4 small strokes. This was probably 3 years after that. I'm still struggling with all of the Lyme and going to different specialists outside of mainstream, paying money for all different alternative treatments. I then started to lose my appetite, and I was no longer able to eat other than little bits of bites, and I was having severe abdominal pain, and I was starting to lose weight without trying. I was every week it was like more and more weight loss was happening. I tried hard not to go to the doctors other than my specialists that were trying to treat the Lyme disease. And eventually it got to the point where I think I was over 55-pound weight loss, and the pain was persisting to the point where I couldn't, it was just unmanageable. So went to my primary care, and he did some blood work, and he was like, oh geez, your pancreatic enzyme levels they were like 20 times the highest point that was within range. And he said, you need to get to the emergency department. And so I went, and the emergency department did a few tests, and they were saying, oh, we really don't know what this is. You should probably see your GYN though, because we can tell that, which had nothing to do with why I was there. We could tell that when they did one of the tests, which was an ultrasound, it had shown something that they then did an internal exam of my cervix and my uterus. And they said, you have, I can't even remember at the moment, but there was, the tissue was showing that it was enlarged or inflamed, and that they needed that looked at. And I thought, well, that's not what I'm here for, but whatever. My body is nothing about my body is right or normal. So I took their recommendation and kind of threw it out the window, because the most important thing was, how do we stabilize this weight loss? How do we get rid of this pain? And just how to keep me alive. And so I went back to the primary care, and the primary care said, what are you doing here? I sent you to the emergency department. I said, yeah, they told me this is, go see the GYN for another matter. And so he said, you need to get back to the emergency department, go to a different hospital, and don't leave. So I did. I went to the main hospital here. And at that time, they were having, ever since COVID, everything's been, as we all know, a nightmare in the healthcare world. So I sat in their emergency department. It was early, maybe 10 o'clock in the morning, and it was around 1 a.m. I'm still sitting there. My husband had to bring in the infusion that I do because the hospital wasn't going to do anything. So they said, yeah, sure, have him bring your infusion in. So we bring my infusion in to this filthy emergency department that is filled with people coughing and germs everywhere. And I am so sick that I can barely sit in this chair any longer. He hooks me up to the infusion on my port. People are looking at me like, what in the heck are you doing? You're self-medicating in the emergency department with an infusion. And it's like, whatever, got to do what I have to do. I was due for my infusion. So, I get that, I'm running the infusion. They finally get me into the emergency, like back in the treatment area after 1 a.m. And the initial person that saw me was a resident, a very young, pleasant resident it was as if she was from 20 years ago, as far as the medical system goes. She was doing everything by the book. She was, it just reminded me of 20 years ago if I had to go to the emergency department. And I could have hugged her because she was compassionate, and she actually asked the right questions. And she said, "Oh, geez, we need you seen by multiple specialists. And this is very concerning, especially with your lab results and with showing the pancreatic enzyme levels." And so I thought, oh, good, there's hope here. And 20 minutes after she does her assessment, her supervising physician, another resident, might have been the head resident, came over, and she laid into me as if it was bizarre. She's like, "What do you want? Vitamins and minerals for your infusion? We can do that for you and send you home on your merry way. You do know that there are dying people out in the waiting room." I sobbed. I was sobbing. I had nothing left in me, and I was just sobbing. I said, "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm dying over here. I'm one of them. And I don't know what to tell you. I can't go home. You can't send me home. Somebody has to figure out what's going on." And the experience was horrific. And I had already been so demeaned by all the other providers over the last 11 years within the mainstream world of medicine that this was just the icing on the cake for me. And I was sobbing. I didn't have any energy. And I said to my husband, I was angry. I said, "Just bring me home. I don't care if I die. I'm done fighting. I don't want to do this anymore." And he had heard me say that before. This wasn't the first, but I was really done. And he started to sob. It was awful. Ultimately, I don't know what changed their mind. They did admit me. And the MRI that they did showed that my pancreas was severely inflamed, that I was in a place of chronic pancreatitis that went misdiagnosed because nobody knew, or I also had stopped pursuing answers. But yet somebody should have picked up that they should have addressed that something was wrong pancreatic-wise. There was also some cysts that they found and other concerning things from the MRI. So the doctor said, it could be cancer, and we know that pancreatic cancer, there's no cure. I'm thinking, oh God, please no. And they said, "Well, we really can't keep you in the hospital. There's no real reason. We're just going to put you on this medicine, and your primary care can monitor you. And we got to wait until the inflammation goes down. So we're going to give it at least 3 months before we do the next test, which will then let us know, are we dealing with cancer? Are we dealing with whatever, what more is going on with this pancreas aside from chronic pancreatitis?" So they sent me home in a really bad state. And I lingered until I started to, maybe 2 months later, started to improve again with all my other additional treatments that I was doing for the Lyme and everything else. And I started to be able to eat and put weight back on. So that led me to the chronic pancreatitis diagnosis. I now get followed by an gastroenterology for that, and I take the medicine for that. In that same time, I was diagnosed with adrenal insufficiency, and they wanted to put me on steroids, which steroids are the worst thing you could give somebody who has a suppressed immune system by the chronic tick infections with the Lyme and the co-infection. So I said, I can't go on that. I had to find a doctor on my own. That's a homeopathic doctor out in Pennsylvania that I do treatments online with. So more funding was coming from my retirement to fund this doctor who's doing natural treatments for me to try to stabilize my adrenal insufficiency on top of, well, that's all he's focusing on, but all the other stuff. And then prior to this chronic pancreatitis, I failed to mention that on 2 separate occasions, my portacath in my chest, where I do the infusions from, twice within 2-year span, I became septic, where the port became infected. And that's a whole nother story of just fighting the system because, again, my body wasn't reacting the way a normal, healthy person's body would react when you're in a septic state. So I was in bed for 3 months, sicker than a dog, dying, and my husband would bring me to the emergency department and they would send me home. Finally, we fought and we said, listen, because my home infusion nurse had done a culture on the blood culture. She drew blood, sent it to the lab, and it would come back that I was in fact had a port infection. They said, "Oh, it's skin contamination. It was done wrong. You're not sick. You don't have that." So 3 emergency visit room later, we finally got a doctor who was new to them, who was a fellow. He was in fellowship to become infectious disease. I don't know what his prior, so he wasn't a new doctor, but was new to infectious disease as a fellow. And he called down to the emergency department and said to them, start this woman immediately on vancomycin and admit her. And it was God intervening, because the attending doctor was telling my husband, we can't do anything for her. We're sending her home again. And again, thankfully, the fellow from ID, infectious disease, said, get her on vancomycin now and get her admitted. I was in the hospital for 14 days on intravenous vancomycin, which is a very, very powerful antibiotic. I then went home with another additional 6 weeks of intravenous antibiotics. While I was in the hospital, they removed the port. I had to get a PICC line put in my arm, which I'd had years before because of the Lyme infections and before getting the portacath. And then I had to wait for that to all heal, the infection to clear, and then surgically get another port placed. Well, 2 years after that second port, I didn't even realize I was infected. It was different. I wasn't in bed for months trying to figure out something's wrong, it's worse than my normal. This time I developed some pain. I have herniated discs in my cervical neck and in my lumbar sacral area. And I experience flare-ups with that regularly, but this was a different kind of pain. It came on sudden. Herniated discs pain will be sudden, but there was something different. I couldn't get up out of bed, and I couldn't control my bladder. I ended up wetting the bed. The pain went into spasms. Like, I describe it as labor times a million, because it was an endless, there was no break of 6 minutes in between or 2 minutes in between contractions. It was a continuous spasming, neurological, horrific pain. And I didn't know, I think I became delirious too, because I couldn't even make sense of, I was yelling out to nobody. Nobody was home, but I was yelling out, help, please help me. And finally, I got the wherewithal. Oh, you have to text your husband. You have to tell him that you need help. So I was able to reach for the phone on the bedside, and I was sending him a quick text, get an ambulance here ASAP. And I knew, because we've had this before, I was like, don't come home and call them now. I don't know how I managed to get that text out, but then he tried calling, and I was like, I can't talk. And I was screaming. So he rushes home from the police department where he works, and the EMTs arrive at the same time, and they're trying to now get me out of the bed on a stretcher and get me down the stairs. The pain was so severe. They injected me with the pain medicine at the time while I was in the bed. It was mortifying too, because the whole bed was wet and I was just not myself. So anyways, we get me to the hospital, and it's now, I don't know, it's late in the night, and they do testing. I don't even remember what. And they said, we've got to get you to the main hospital. We're going to take you by ambulance. We're not sure, but it seems like you have an infection in your spine. And if it's an infection that it could be deadly. So they didn't say that directly to me. They told him. I don't remember much, because I think they started to really put a lot of pain medicine into me. So I was very brain fuzzy. So I was transported to the main hospital in Springfield from where I was. And I do recall them taking scissors to rip off the shirt and get me under the MRI. And then I, in and out, remember that they had put me in the ICU, and they told my husband, go home. We'll know what infection this is. And by the morning, we're, going to culture everything. So ultimately, I remember being transferred from the ICU after about 24 hours. They had me on the vancomycin infusion again for the infection. And I learned that I had what is called vertebral osteomyelitis. So the infection, I went septic again. It was system-wide, but the infection traveled to my spine and basically ate part of L5-S1. That was where the pain was, because the infection was eating the bone of the vertebrae. And the pain, they had me on a special air mattress. They had me on a pain pump. I don't remember a lot. I was in the hospital again for, I think, 14 days. It was brutal. They sent me home eventually to continue the vancomycin infusion like I had done with the previous septic infection. But it was different this time because of the fact that it was now in my spine and the pain was unbearable. So they sent me home with a hospital bed, and I couldn't tolerate the hospital bed. It wasn't the same special air mattress they had me on in the hospital. So I ultimately found a way to get somewhat comfortable in my recliner with a bunch of like air pillows blown up, and I would sit upright and try to sleep. So I stayed in the recliner for 6 weeks, and then eventually, as things started to heal, I progressed to laying upright in bed with all sorts of wedges, and I stayed in that position for sleep for, I think, 2 years. At that, just because of the spine. And I had a very difficult time trying to walk, because every time I took a step, the nerve pain would just jolt right up my spine and down my legs. And the doctors didn't want to touch it because they said there's the possibility of their infection still being within the bone. We don't know. So we don't open you up, because if we open you up, we're going to spread the infection throughout the rest of your spine. And we have that risk, and we don't want to do that. So no surgeon would touch me to try to do any kind of stability to the spine at the L5-S1. And it's just brutal. So I want to say it was a good 2 years before I could finally take a step without the pain just shooting up and down, up the spine and down the spine and down the leg. So that eventually, I still live with the pain every day, but it's nothing like it was. But they did tell me if your port gets infected again, the infection will go back to that area of your spine, and it will get worse. So I live with the fear of, oh my gosh, is my port going to get infected again? And I wanted to say, I don't want to do these infusions anymore, but they were working to help stabilize somewhat the dysautonomia that I deal with. So I still have the port, but I'm also struggling with the insurance and the pharmaceutical company saying, we're not going to cover it. The insurance says they'll cover it, and the pharmaceutical company says you're not paying us enough money to do it. So next week's my last delivery. I have no idea what I'm going to do. My husband says we'll find a place and we'll privately pay. I mean, we live on a police officer's salary. The only reason why we're able to do what we do is because we were really good savers. And I was always called a miser when I was a child, because I would save, and any resource I had, I would save it. I gotta save it. So I did that through my professional life and as an adult. Oh, I gotta save. I have to save. I didn't know I was saving to save my life, right? Yeah, our money isn't endless. It's gonna run out. So I've been relying on God. God is really what's keeping me going. And the funny thing is, I don't look sick, especially right now. Like, I don't look sick. And I've heard that my entire time, other than when I was, dealing with the septicemia and the vertebral osteomyelitis and the chronic pancreatitis. Other than those episodes, which were frequent and long, I generally don't look sick. And I can hold it together for a few hours, and people will be like, you're crazy. You're not sick. So I've dealt with that. I've lost a lot of family. I've lost most of my friends. I've lost all of my work colleagues because they don't believe half of what, other than, the osteomyelitis and the things that the mainstream medicine knows about. But they're like, well, you've healed from that now. No, I haven't. And I also put on a good face. It's just who I am. I've always hidden any pain that I'm experiencing, whether it's emotional or physical. I do not want anybody to see it. I will put a smile on my face and I will be positive. I don't want the world or the people that I know to see the suffering that I endure. The people who get to see that is my husband and unfortunately my daughter, but I do try to hide that from her as much as possible as also. But I gave you a very long-winded version of a brief summary still, believe it or not, of the medical hell that it's been. And yet I'm so hopeful because QHS came into my life again as divine intervention by Helen and I having that communication that we had through private messenger. And I just smile because I'm like, thank you, God, that's you, you're coming through again. And so I'm very excited, very, very excited about beginning the journey with QHS, going into using the touch for the third time. Hopefully this afternoon, I'm going to sit and do it. I'm only going to spend I don't let it run out. I didn't track how many minutes it was the first and second time, and I should have. But I'll probably run it for anywhere from 1 to 3 minutes. And we'll see where it takes me. Each time it brings me into a state of peace. And I've been reading a lot of the different testimonials, and I don't have I don't feel it coursing through my body or anything. But that sense of peace is coursing through my body, and that sense of calm. And I really needed that the last few days, being so worried and strung out about insurance and pharmaceutical infusion company dropping me for the treatment, the infusion that I've been doing for 10 years. And I can't wait the V9 as well as a complement to the touch, and then the QArc and all of the other amazing things that I'm reading about through the newsletter. Really, really, really hopeful and excited. And the timing couldn't be better because I was at a point of, I give up. I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore.
Join us on the Prequel, where every story matters and every voice is heard. Because here at QHS, we're all about healing, learning, and growing together.